We continue on our focus on the state of our democracy. This morning we're asking if our democracy can be saved and if it's time for democratic renewal and political reform, if you will. Also, who exactly should be held accountable for the poor state of our democracy? To discuss this further, we're joined by social justice activist Pelisa Nkomo. Pelisa, good morning and thank you very much for your time. You know, one would say July has become that month of a deep reflection on the state of governance, law and order, and particularly the policies that were meant to transform the economic system and ultimately fulfill the Constitution's promise of an equitable society. And this is purely because of the riots. If you had to characterize it for us, where does the problem lie?
Well, I think it's a fair statement, actually, to say that South Africans are actually quite anxious about what is happening in South Africa. We saw the killings. The Sinari incident, we're still recovering from that. We've just heard about this, Soweto incident where people were killed. The cost of living is on the rise. Of course, that is not actually threatening the quality of our democracy. By the way, we're very strong, democratic institutions, and I think the constitutionalism in South Africa is really entrenched in itself. And South Africans are aware, by the way, that they do enjoy rights. But the key issue here is actually the economic policies that we've actually been implementing over the years. I think the contradiction between social welfarism, which is driven by the social policy, and as well as the neoliberal policy, which is actually carried through our macroeconomic policy, which is both monetary policy and fiscal policy. And those are the macroeconomic policies are such critical enablers, by the way, for citizens to be able to lead both decent lives and as well as productive lives. I think the recent statistics in terms of unemployment, for example, paint a very, very sad picture that, Black women, African women, 40% of them actually are disengaged in terms of the economy and lead unproductive lives, and naturally are actually sitting on the social policy and social welfare. And one of the key issues that is quite scary, though, about that is the fact that when you have such a big population, in fact, as well as young people, youth, sitting at 62%, it means that we actually, through our macroeconomic policy, perpetuating intergenerational poverty, as well as it actually signals that we have wealth disparities, asset disparities, structural skills mismatch in the economy. So, and what it means that from an economic planning perspective and design is that the economy is moving ahead of those who are actually sitting in the driving seat. But even those who are at the driving seat of ensuring that they design an economy that is responsive to the South African context are actually kind of like out of touch in terms of what type of economy we should be designing. Mm-hmm. I think on paper is the clarity that we need to industrialize South African economy, which has a history of deindustrialization. But you don't see concomitant commitment in terms of both financial resources, monetary policy support, but also at the same time from a micro sectoral planning. You don't see that happening. Mm-hmm. Instead, what is happening over the years, by the way, is liberalization of the economy. Look at the textile industry. Almost more than 90% of what we wear today at home and what citizens wear is actually manufactured from outside. It's actually imported. Now, the textile industry is such a critical sector because it's linked up to a plethora of industries. One of those is agricultural sector because cotton is actually a part of the agricultural sector. So if you look at the value chain that gets lost from the agricultural sector, and if you look at the value chain that gets lost from the textile sector, and I'm just picking up this sector because it's a labor-intensive sector, it does not only attract women, but also it could actually stimulate rural economies. And mm-hmm. It's such a missed opportunity for South Africa.
When we seek to have this conversation around democracy that has probably not served the majority of South Africans, you are saying we should confine it to policies alone. But when we look at these policies, the economic system currently, it adds to the deepening inequality and again betrays the promise of what the Constitution says, or envisions, which is a more equitable society. So you would still say that somehow this doesn't tie in to the democracy question, that here perhaps we do have a democratic crisis.
No, it actually doesn't tie. In fact, by the way, South Africa has a very vibrant democracy. And it's actually, and I think vibrant, but also matured. There's a component of it where it has a matured policy discourse, where in fact we could be doing so many things. One of the key things I've been saying, for example, in my several interviews around dealing, because economic policy is such an important enabler. So let me make two examples, for example. The first issue that a human being needs as soon as the is conceived. Firstly, mothers must have access to quality healthcare, right? So if you look at now, access to quality healthcare in South Africa, it has improved, but it has its own fault lines. That's the first issue. The second issue, they need to have access to proper water, proper housing, and as well as education system. Again, you can say there are certain things that have improved in that sector, but at the same time, there are also serious delivery fault lines. I mean, I don't know if you've been following the reports in Gauteng around the state of public healthcare in Gauteng. We even had a whistleblower, by the way, one of the doctors. But then the issue is that, so the foundation, so the constitutionalism, so you have constitution that defines what type of rights South Africans should be actually enjoying. And that component is actually well known and well grounded. So what, therefore, those who are in power are meant to do is to then develop policies that are responsible to that equitable promise that is embedded into the Constitution. So there are components of that, by the way, that South Africa that meets. But at the heart of it, by the way, is actually the economic policy. Because the economic policy is a crucial enabler, particularly with the history of South Africa, of economic discrimination, separate development, and where South African citizens, particularly Black, who have always had to sell their labor for them to become economically active. Now, even in the context where South Africans are able to sell their labor, but they're not able to lead decent lives, right? So the key question is that as I said, that you have strong democratic institutions in South Africa. We have parliament that is quite robust, and of course, again, with its weaknesses in as far as the legislative development, for example, you have provincial parliaments, you have municipalities, you have ward councils, ward committees where citizens are able to participate. What are the key issues that we actually need to start and where we actually need to start strengthening? It's what we call local governance, right? And part of the local governance has nothing to do with local government as such, but it's a component of that. You need to get citizens really feeding into the process of local governance and public policy. Amongst those is, what are the IDPs, intended to do? They're intended to deliver services to the citizens, but at the same time is that it's also instruments that are used to make it sure that you hold those that are accountable, those that are in power accountable. And the question we must ask is, it's whether those that are in power have actually been held accountable. We've seen, for example, a plethora of marches and demonstration and high discontent among South Africans, where they will take to the street and sometimes even lead into the destruction of infrastructure. And it is true that sometimes we do get those that are in power who often become extremely stubborn, right, and take on a hardline approach when citizens are speaking. And that's something that we need to have an open conversation about it. But in as far as, a South African democratic or democracy being threatened, is actually, we're not anywhere closer to that. I think, as I said, that we're solid, institutions, and South Africans are aware of it. But what we need to get it very clearly is our accountability instruments, where when citizens are talking and expressing their displeasure at the conditions of living and the scourge of poverty, unemployment and social inequality, increased gender-based violence, that we have leaders who can hear citizens very well and are committed to actually change the discourse.
So not all is lost here. At least there must just be accountability. When citizens speak, they must be heard. Pelisa, thank you very much for your time. That was social justice activist Pelisa Nkomo. More news and updates.